Hey everyone, it's me, Aridosis Klum Rashid. I'm an anthropologist and sociologist. I'm going to give you a parable now. You have Julie. Julie married Mark when she was 19. Julie and Mark had 3 children together. 20 years later, Julie and Mark divorces because Mark cheated on her multiple times. Now, Julie, she married Mark when she was 19. She's now 39. At age 40, she meets Kevin, and she's into Kevin. Now, her children are encouraging her to move on, because even the children were fed up with their father's adultery over and over again. Now, Julie now eventually marries Kevin. But guess what? Now there are marital problems. And now Julie's thinking about divorce again, but she doesn't want to divorce again. And so she's struggling. So one day she goes to a therapist about the matter. And the therapist, of course, asks her some questions about the previous marriage, about how she was raised. Because the therapist understands the way you were raised affects your later relationships and all of that. And the therapist found out that Julie did not have such a good relationship with her earthly father. Her earthly father was often absent. And if you called him out on anything, he would scream at you and go nuts. So Julie now married Mark. And Mark was quite outgoing, kind of the opposite of her father. But here's the thing. Julie was quite introverted, and she barely took initiative in her life. So the more the therapist talks with her, the more the therapist realizes, hold on a minute, this woman never got over her daddy issues. And while the therapist is talking to her, the therapist realizes, hold on a minute, this woman keeps making excuses for her behavior. The therapist found out that Julie, when it came to sexual intercourse, never made any effort to please her first husband, Mark. And it was Mark who always had to, initiate going out on dates or initiate to wear nice clothes, sexy dresses, and all of that. So she was quite lazy. Now, okay, this is no excuse for her previous husband to cheat on her. If the marriage did not work out and Julie was not cooperative, he should have divorced her the proper way and give a good explanation to the children, as far as he could do that. But anyway, she should have learned during her first marriage that she needs to look at herself too and admit that, okay, she has some issues too. The thing is, Mark, her first husband, now married someone else. And Mark is now in therapy for his adulterous ways. And by the way, Mark impregnated his new wife also. So he's starting a second family now. And Mark also apologized to his children for how he treated their mother. So Mark's also making it up to their children. But here's the thing. Julie is now married to Kevin, and she goes through the same stuff she used to go through with Mark. Only thing is, she's a bit older now. Question, who is the problem here? It's Julie. Mark is not the problem anymore because she's not married to Mark anymore. Oh, and by the way, Mark is not the same man anymore because Mark improved since the divorce. The children are not the problem because the children reconcile with their father and the children get pushed to their mom that she has to move on. Kevin is not the problem because Kevin is wondering what goes on. Now, here's the issue. Julie refuses to move on. Oh yes. She refuses to admit that she also is a partaker of the situation and that she needs to look at her parts too. It's one thing to be 19 and still suffering some psychological disability, which makes it hard for you to move on. Some people have difficulty moving on, so they're stuck. And therefore, they need therapy, counseling, and professional help. So some people are just stuck and they have difficulty moving on. But then you also have people that refuse to move on. Big difference. In this case, Julie refused to move on. So, no marriage will work for her. No sexual relationship will ever work out well for her. Even her relationship with her children is getting worse now because even the children realize, hold on a minute, dad cheated on mom multiple times. That was horrible. They divorced. Dad moved on. Dad apologized. Dad's improving. Dad's in therapy. Dad even started a new family. Dad even made up to us. This is going to be a better father towards us. He can't be a better husband anymore towards mom because they're divorced, but he's going to be a better father towards us, even now that we're almost grown. So eventually, a few years later, all the children of Mark and Julie are grown up. They realize, oh my God, what the heck is wrong with mom? Now the whole view of the mom changes. Now, this is just a parable I'm giving you. What I'm teaching in this video may not apply to you. If it doesn't apply to you, praise God, it's applied to you. But just understand, there are people who have difficulty moving on, and there are people that refuse to move on. There's a big difference. Just because someone has difficulty moving on doesn't mean that they're toxic, that they're narcissistic, and that they're wasting your time, and they have ill will towards you. Some people generally really have difficulty moving on, and they need intervention because they can't do it by themselves. But then you also have people that refuse to move on. Just understand the difference very well. When someone is difficulty moving on, you need to bring intervention there so they can actually process things. And there are times you cannot intervene because you're not qualified to. In that case, don't just pray for them. And where you can, you refer them to someone who can. Because the moving on is an inside job. It has to come from the inside. You can't make someone move on. Now, you can make someone behave a certain way externally, but moving on is an inside job. If someone does not move on, they become polluted and they become harmful towards themselves and others. So someone that's not moving on is harmful to even be around. They don't have to be a narcissist or a reprobate. The fact alone they refuse to move on means they're becoming harmful. And eventually they become a demonic portal that demons can use to afflict and harm other people. So, if you have difficulty moving on, hey, don't be embarrassed that you need therapy or counseling, whatever. Admit it. It's brave, it's courageous, and I praise it that you admit you need help. Go and get your help as soon as possible. All right? But then there are people who refuse to move on. I'm sorry, if you refuse to move on, then you are the problem. It doesn't matter how much to blame others are. I know maybe others are to blame too. It's not just you. But if all the others are moving on except you, then the problem eventually becomes you, not them. There are people alive today who are still fighting their parents who were passed away a long time ago. Listen, if your parents were horrible or toxic, whatever, that was them. That's their fault. That's their loss. You should have shaken them off of you, separated from them, disconnect from them, unlink from them, so that you can move on away from their toxicity. But you to remain angry with your parents who were wrong. If your parents were horrible, they were wrong, this is what they were. Not all parents, if your parents were great and good for you. But some people had parents who were horrible. But if your parents were horrible, you had to process it and get away from them. You shouldn't honor them and act like they're better than they really were. But a lot of people are still fighting their parents, but are taking it out on their grandchildren. I mean, what the heck is this? Now they pass on generational curses. Listen, some people have difficulty moving on. Others refuse to move on. When you read the Old Testament, when the Heavenly Father delivered the Israelites out of Egypt under the guidance of Moses, under the guidance of Moses, the Heavenly Father delivered the Israelites out of Egypt. What happened? Those Israelites were still invested in Pharaoh was dead. Pharaoh died, the military died, the Egyptian empire collapsed completely. So that was over. That was over. Absolutely. So if the Egyptian empire was over, Pharaoh was dead, his military died. The firstborn of Egypt were dead. Egypt was in ruins. Why the heck were those Israelites even considering going back to Egypt while Egypt was in ruins? Because they refused to move on. Moving on requires humility, admitting you're vulnerable, admitting you need others. It requires self-reflection. Also requires you to take responsibility and to stop escaping. It all comes down to you have to stop escaping from stuff and start to deal with things in a constructive way. Now, you can deal with things the wrong way and end up messing up yourself even more. I'm not talking about that. Moving on means you admit reality, that you're vulnerable, that you can't redo the past. The past is done, but you have the present and you ought to be better in the now, and that you need to process things in order to move further. It requires you to own up to stuff, to face things, and to admit where you need help, and to get along once help is available. Not many people are willing to do all of this. So moving on is not the same as, as just replacing people. I mean, in the parable I gave unto you, Julie replaced her ex-husband, Mark, with her new husband, Kevin. Does that mean she moved on? No, she didn't. She may not be thinking about Mark anymore, but the same conflict she had with Mark, she's now playing it out with Kevin. She's still in the past and operating in the past. Look at your own life. Are you stuck? If you're stuck, just admit it. Don't be embarrassed, because now you admit it. Now you take responsibility, you take ownership, and you look for help to get better and to improve. That's praiseworthy, that's honorable. And I'm telling you, once you notice that people refuse and resist to move on, I'm telling you, slowly but surely, keep your distance from them and peacefully move away from them. You don't have to cut them off, ghost them, all of that. Just limit contact, reduce contact, and make sure you're not around them that often. And look, if they decide to ghost you and leave you, hey, that's on them, because they never want to move on anyway. And let me tell you, people that refuse to move on, they only value the relief you contribute to. They're all about relief. They value the fact that you being around makes them feel better, or you make them, enable them to escape. Some people can't stand you. They don't like you, but they want you around so they can have you to look down upon. Some people can't stand you. They don't like you. They have issues against you, and they want you around because they need someone to hate, someone to dislike, so that they don't have to look at themselves. Yes, disliking and hating people is not but a coping mechanism to not have to face yourself, because people that are healthy and stable, they love their neighbor as herself. They have goodwill towards others, and if they have difficulty with people, they admit that difficulty, but it doesn't turn into dislike, especially not into hatred. Disliking and hating people is all about you not owning up to your own lack and your own deficiencies, and therefore you focus on the deficiencies or the lack of someone else. And by keeping that in focus, you don't notice your own. And by tricking others to dislike this individual too, everyone keeps their focus on their wrong and nobody sees yours. This needs to stop. This needs to stop. So keep on agreeing with Christ. Again, hit the like button, share this video, subscribe to the channel, become a member of the channel, donate in links below, contribute to the funding of my PhD by writing PhD for your donation. Check my novels on Amazon, and I see you in my next live stream. Be at peace and live life to glorify Christ.